with the popularity of dahlias in the world, now more than ever, I've looked forward to this interview for quite a time. Welcome, Kristine, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Scott. I love your podcast. I always listen to it. You have the best guests, so I'm really excited to be here too.
Well, thank you. I didn't know that. And that's I just when I watch some of the things you have hybridized and that you've created and just the things you do, it makes me more excited about this one flower than most, I have to say. And I always like to start at the beginning. So I'm kind of curious, how did you find your way into this world of flowers?
Well, I always enjoyed gardening. My dad had a vegetable garden, and I used to go with him and do that. We never really grew flowers, but I kind of took that passion of growing even through college. I had a little plot, and then when we moved to Santa Cruz, we started a bed and breakfast, and so my husband and my kids were getting old. I have two kids, and they were getting in junior high and high school, and they were like, Mom, they didn't want to hang out with me that much. So I knew I needed a plan for the future, that because our kids were growing up. So I just went. I just decided that a friend gave me actually some dahlias from Costco, and I grew them,
Wow.
just kind of on the side of my house. And Brian, my husband, said, wow, those are beautiful. We should put those in the bed and breakfast. Like, we could put those in the rooms, and that would be like amazing. And so we just decided, like, okay, I'll start growing a few. So I grew like 6 and then 60, and now I'm up to 2,000 dahlias. So, and we don't have the bed and breakfast anymore, but at the same time we were doing that, I was starting to approach florists too. And that was really nice. We have some great florists in town. They do a lot of wedding businesses. So we're on the coast of Santa Cruz, kind of between San Francisco and Monterey. And it's a big kind of wedding area. Quite a few beautiful venues for that. And so the florists were excited to get dahlias for that. And we have a dahlia society here too. So that also helped me learn how to grow dahlias really, really well. And we have a really excellent climate for doing them. So, everything was sort of falling in place. Yeah. My son and I used to grow giant pumpkins together. And so, did that for 7 years. We grew like almost an 800-pound pumpkin. So, our kids could get inside of it. That's, if you can't want to picture how big that is. And we used to have to rent like a big excavator to even lift the pumpkin out of the patch and take it to the county fair and things like that. We had so much fun doing that. But again, I learned a lot about hybridizing through that process, because my son and I used to cross pollinate the different pumpkins, because they were really into that, trying to get them bigger and bigger and bigger at the time. So
Okay, I
anyway.
never would have thought we were going to be talking about giant pumpkins when we started this, but I love that. I really do. So, okay, so I have 1,000 questions. First of all, I have to ask. So, how big of an area do you grow on? I mean, 2,000 dahlias is a lot, but growing pumpkins is also takes up a lot of space too.
Yeah, each pumpkin took about 500 square feet to grow each plant, but I grow on about a quarter of an acre. I have 2 plots. I have a quarter of an acre, and then I grow at my house, which I can grow about 300 dahlias here at my house in my front yard. So my neighbors like it because it's just beautiful with dahlias, most of the summer. And then the quarter acre is about 5 minutes from my house. And so I've been farming there since 2006.
Wow.
And it was a property we bought that had basically a big backyard. And so it was really not in good shape when we first got it. The people had lived there for a couple generations. And in those older times, people used to kind of use it as a place to dump things. And so when we first got the farm, we had a lot of cleanup to do. We would find shoes and car parts and things like that. And so it took us a couple of years to kind of get it going, and we did it in sections. And so it was sort of a progress to get it in good enough shape to start growing on it. But I was always an organic gardener, so I did start out with organic methods, lots of compost and manures and things like that. But I also was kind of new at learning about that, and I ended up over putting compost in and getting my levels a little higher than I had hoped. So it was kind of good to I recommend for new farmers on a new area to do a really good soil test to begin with, as opposed to just jumping in and starting to add material. Really find out what your soil needs before you add too much, because then I have now up to the point of my phosphorus and potassium are high, and we kind of are high in our area, which I didn't know at first too. And so it was good for me to learn about that through the soils test, and now I'm much better at helping my soil along and knowing exactly what it needs.
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
it's funny. It's like, it's always hard to know where to begin a conversation sometimes. And soil, I can't think of a better place to start than soil. And the idea of adding too much compost and how that can impact things. So let me ask this question, if I can. Like, what would you consider to be the ideal levels, maybe, in your area for, and really, I don't know if that's different. I said in your area, but really dahlias are probably like the same thing everywhere.
Yeah.
What is kind of the ideal percentages you want, is like you would try to attain in your
Yeah. So you
soil?
want your pH around 6.5 to 6.8, something like that, close to that. Mine's closer to 7, but they seem to grow fine that way. You want, good organic, I would say high in organic matter soil. I like that. They grow really well. They're fairly heavy feeders because they're giving you on the blooms that are on the smaller side, like the 3 to 4 inch blooms, you can get almost a bloom a day from a plant. So they can be really productive. At least here in California, we get almost a bloom a day. So you can kind of count on that in once they're really going in July and August, September, even sometimes
Hmm.
into October. Yeah, so I would say that they also need a fair amount of water. So you have to watch your watering. In the peak of the season, I probably water every other day here in California, and we've been really dry and going through a drought for the last 7 years. So we've been really on the dry side. This year, we're finally getting our average water amount, even though we had a very wet, December, January here. We're still not like above average, which you would think we would be. But
Yeah.
yeah, those are pretty much, you want good soil, high in organic matter. Dahlias are somewhat heavy feeders, so you want to make sure you've got the right amount of uh, nitrogen and all of the things that they need in your soil. We're doing no-till. We were originally tilling, and then we stopped, and we've been no-till for about 7 years now, and I really recommend that. I mean, I have seen a big change in the dahlias and how they grow, and I really like taking care of all the biology that's in the soil, because that's really what's feeding our plants, not the fertilizers that we put in, but the biology in there that's leaving their manures in there and aerating the soil, and just helping out. Even mycorrhizal will grab nutrients from far away and bring it to your plants. So there's lots of really good things going on in the soil,
I
but
love
you
that.
do need to kind of nurture that for sure.
Well, and I think so many times, especially when you're dealing with a bulb or corm or a tuber in this case, a lot of times people feel like, well, it's all in there, isn't it? And it's like, no, it's a little more complicated than that.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that you're saying it, because I just, want to reassure people that no, it does take a little bit of input. And
Mhm.
so in Santa Cruz, I can't imagine that it gets very cold there. I mean, I know it gets cool, but do you have to dig your dahlias, or do you leave them in the ground?
Yeah, we wouldn't have to dig them here. There are downsides to not digging pretty much anywhere in California. We have gophers, which love
Mm.
dahlias. So you could have a situation where you left your tubers in the ground, and then you thought you had a whole row of dahlias, and over the winter they got all eaten, and they're underground, so you couldn't really see what's going on. Like when we had a really wet year like this year, Dahlias don't like to be underwater, and we had so much water, they would have been underwater and there would have been a fair amount of rot. And then we're also part of the American Dahlia Society, and one of the ways that we make money for our club is we sell our tubers. So we recommend digging them every year, not only so that we can make funds for our club, but it's also a really good idea to dig because you wouldn't have to every year, like you could do every other year. But what happens underground is you start with one tuber and then it goes to anywhere from like 4 to 24 tubers in 1 year. A dahlia plant can make that many. And so what would happen is if you left it in the ground, that 24 would go to, 48. And I dug up a clump that was, almost 3 feet by 3 feet when I had left it in the ground for like 4 years. And then what happens is it gets almost impossible to divide that. It's very difficult to divide it. You could get maybe some of the tubers off the top, but you would probably just have to trash most of it. So it's not like there's an advantage like, oh, I'll get 100 tubers of that one variety. It doesn't really work that way. And a lot of times when they're so crowded like that, they tend to rot too. There's just so many on top of each other. And they could rot. And then the other thing is when spring comes, there are eyes on the tuber crown, and the eyes are what send up the shoot. So if you have one dahlia tuber, you might get 2 shoots coming up. But if you have 24 tubers, and let's say all of them were viable, you could get 48 shoots coming up, and that would be just a crowded mess. And dahlias really like in our area to produce powdery mildew. And so, you've got a crowded situation. So powdery mildew is better if you have less of a crowded situation. And then also, if you're looking for flower size too, when you have that much energy going into those many sprouts and as big of a plant as you might get, your bloom size is going to be coming down too. So, I mean, maybe some people would say, well, that's an advantage if you're growing those giants, because designers don't like the huge ones usually, unless they're doing an arch or some kind of big installation. But yeah, those are kind of the downsides to leaving them in the ground. I would say the upside to leaving them in the ground, if you left them in the ground for a couple of years, would be it just naturally starts to sprout when the temperature gets just right. So, here in California, we could get a warm spell in December where it's in the 70s, and the plant would say, oh, I'm ready to sprout, and it would sprout. And then if you got a frost, it would kick it back or kill it off, and it would start again. But so there are positives. If you don't have a frost and the temperatures are just right, you can get dahlias really early, like Mother's Day here, if the situation was just right. But typically, like we've been in the 30s this week at night, so it's a little bit of we've actually been pretty cold this whole last month. And so, if you did have your dahlias outside, you would need to protect them, cover them with some agribond, which is like a row cover that keeps it a little bit warmer and keeps the frost off from killing your plants back. So those are kind of the pluses and the minuses for leaving them in the ground. I mean, the plus would be also a lot less work for that year anyway. Yeah, because dividing is work. Definitely dividing and storing your tubers is a fair amount of work.
Well, and I also think if you're doing no-till, how much soil disruption is there pulling those up every year?
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, I see all the benefits to it. Do you have to worry about that at all? Or is just because the rest of the soil is so wonderful that it recovers quickly?
Yeah, I'd say it kind of recovers. I mean, you are disturbing like a foot by foot round area, but the rest you're not tilling.
Right.
So I think for me, it's kind of what you have to do with dahlias. So there's no getting around it. So yeah, it's not like officially where, like with no-till, a lot of times like farmers will just cut whatever they're growing, like if they're doing broccoli, they'll just cut the broccoli stem off and leave the roots in the ground. But with dahlias, we can't really do that.
Right.
So
No, that makes
what
sense.
I do is start a cover crop in the winter.
Oh,
So
okay.
in the fall and the winter, so I put in a nitrogen fixing cover crop. So it has 5 different kinds of seeds that I start. It's got bell beans, vetch, wheat, oats. It's got a variety of nitrogen fixing properties in that cover crop. And so what I do with that cover crop, which is happening right now out here, is I grew it up, I weed whacked it down, and now I've covered it with a tarp. I like a silage tarp, and now I'm waiting 6 weeks, and that will kill off my cover crop. And so the roots are in the ground, they are feeding the biology, 3 or 4 months out of the year. I am doing kind of proper no-till, by not disturbing the soil and
Sure.
feeding the biology. But yeah, so that's a good option too for dahlia growers if they can do a cover crop. Like, are you able to do cover crops in your area?
Yeah, we are. They're a little bit different because some of the cover crops, would get killed back as it gets too cold, but then some of them do really well. And so I know of a couple growers that are actually using them this year here in my area, and I'm always excited about that because I just think anytime you can put put things back into the soil. And a lot of times people think, well, doesn't cover crops take things out of the soil? But not if you manage it correctly. It really doesn't. When you cut everything down, do you chop it up more? Or do you find that the heat you generate with the tarp breaks down all the tops of the plant, or do you put that into a compost pile?
Yeah, usually what I do is I just chop it down in sections, like 4 to 5, 6 inch sections, and just take it down like that and then leave it there because the biology in the soil comes up. Like worms come up at night, like night crawlers. They're called night crawlers because they come out at night and then they find a leaf and then they pull it down into their little tunnels and things like that. So you've got a lot of biology that's working and taking. I mean, it's pretty amazing when you lift that tarp after like 6 weeks. It's just beautiful soil under there mostly. If
That's
you
wonderful.
if you had really dry winter like we do sometimes, it's good to wet the cover crop once you weed whacked it down because it can kind of dry out on top. But for me, that's fine because I just pull it aside and then plant the dahlia tuber in. It's almost like a mulch or a straw that you might
Right.
put on top anyway. So yeah, so the cover crop is pretty easy to do here in California for sure.
That's incredible. So
Mhm.
when with the long growing season that you get, when do dahlias start and end for you?
Well, if we want to push the season, sometimes I do that where I get cuttings going in December inside my house. So I make little plants. I'll get them out into the ground February 1st under again agribond and row cover and maybe double blanking them at night when the weather's going to be cold. The soil's probably around 50 when I put it in there, so it's a little bit cold, but they do pretty well. They are growing under there. They're doing pretty well. And so we can have dahlias in the ground from February to, could have them in the ground till December, and they could give you a few blooms in December. And then the ones that you get into February, I think Mother's Day one year I had 250 blooms for Mother's Day. So but most people aren't willing to push the season that hard, So typically in California, we put them in around tax time, April 15th. That's sort of our last frost date because you have to watch for frost with dahlias. So our last frost date is April 15th. You just dig them, put them in the ground, and they come up anywhere from 2 weeks to a month later. And then, take a couple months to grow into good plants. And then you can start cutting the flowers. It's just pretty much that easy. I mean, yeah.
Wow. So is most of your business selling tubers or flowers or just 50-50? How is it structured?
Well, we have a couple avenues, which is good, I think.
Sure.
We do sell our flowers to our local florists here. So we have about 5 local florists that we work with. We sell to them twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays typically, and that works out really well. We typically cut our flowers into groupings that we think look good. We take a little video of the groupings we have. We send it to our florists and say, any of these buckets are available, any of these tubs are available. Which ones do you want? I have numbers on them, 1 to 5. And that's an easy way for us and for them to see what they're getting. So I'll, kind of do close-ups so they can kind of get a sense for color and all that. So we do that during the summer. Selling tubers, I did sell tubers last year, but it's not really something I want to do. So I'm going to be, I don't really sell tubers. I give my extras to my Dahlia Society typically.
Sure.
I also have a few Dahlia suppliers that are my suppliers, like Stonehouse and Triple Wren. So they do work, so they get my new varieties, they will propagate them, make more, and then sell them, and then I get a percentage of that. So so that's part of it for me, and then I don't have to do the actual selling of the tubers. They do that, or the cuttings. Stonehouse does cuttings, and Triple Wren does tubers. And then back in 2020, my husband and I wrote a book. It's called Dahlia Breeding for the Farmer, Florist, and the Home Gardener. And that was because I hybridize dahlias. So I cross dahlias and make new varieties. And there wasn't really a book out there on it. I mean, there were places you could find little snippets
Right.
in there. And if you weren't part of a Dahlia Society, because there's usually always a couple of people in your Dahlia Society that are hybridizers, but sometimes they don't want to tell all their secrets and things like that. But I started hybridizing. We had some great people in our society that really shared a ton with me. And I said, in 2020, when COVID hit, I had been thinking it would be a good idea to write a book on hybridizing, because it seemed like there were so many people out there interested in it. And I didn't really want people to have to go through what I did when I first started hybridizing,
Sure.
which was a couple of years of super frustration because I didn't quite understand how it worked. And so I thought, well, I could write a book on it. And my husband's a great writer. And so we kind of lucked out. He's a photographer too. So we have beautiful pictures. I take a zillion pictures. We had it, we kind of had it, and he was able to do it. And so we were able to self-publish through Amazon
Yeah.
with that. So we don't have to do any of the shipping or any of the printing. We don't have to, sometimes with publishers, you have to buy in the books and then ship them out yourself. But Amazon does that. It's pretty amazing. They have printing places all over the country and all over the world in a lot of places too. Like if you ordered my book in England, it would come from an Amazon printer in England, where like if you ordered a book from Amazon here in the US, it might get printed in New York, it might get printed in Ohio, it might get printed in California. And it just kind of depends, like different books that I've gotten get printed different places. And so then they just ship it out, and then they give us a percentage of the sales. So that part's really nice, because we did the work and now they do their work. And so we've been selling that book for a while. And so those are all incomes for the farm. The farm costs about $30,000 a year to operate my little farm. It's mostly, I have Narciso who helps me. He's great. And in the summer, I need help cutting and getting the farm ready for mostly cutting and keeping it going. So, and then I have a couple of great friends, my friend Jan and my friend Iris, that just come and help me. So I kind of look out there. And Jan's an amazing colorist. She's like a designer, so she really helps me with choosing the varieties that I should save from my hybridizing program. So we spend time every week kind of looking at the new varieties that I've created, and then she'll say, wow, that is a color I have never seen, or that's a color that is really needed. And then the second part is I invite my florists in too, to say, here are my new varieties. Tell me what you guys think. And they have given me so much great advice too. They will say, this is a color we've been looking for and we can't find it. So I feel lucky to have a team of people, because they have the eye. I love to grow things. And I was an art major in college, but I think when you're working with the flowers day in and day out, you have a different relationship to them than really even the grower. So, yeah.
And I think too, you've invested time and resources, and it's so funny when you mentioned this earlier. I wanted to ask this question. Being involved with the Dahlia Society, which is a great resource, I think, but I think a lot of times what they look for is that novelty, specialty, unique, graded bloom, and what florists look for aren't always the same thing.
Right.
And I'm like, so when you hybridize, who are you hybridizing for? For your personal pleasure, or do you evaluate all these different qualities for sort of both camps?
Yeah, I feel like I can live in both worlds a lot.
Hmm.
And I think ideally what you do is you have a flower that florists love and that the show flower people love too. Then you've got it made
Yeah.
in shape, There's one I
Right.
hybridized called Kay's Papa John. It's this beautiful white informal decorative and the petals are moving. So it has the movement that florists like, but it's a really good form for show. And this year it in our area, it got the top winning bloom for our shows here, our Dahlia shows. But I really enjoy hybridizing for the florists and designers because I think, like you said, the American Dahlia Society has certain kind of strict rules about what a dahlia should look like. The color actually is supposed to be pure, like a pure yellow or a pure white. It's not supposed to be mottled in any way or
Mm.
have kind of multiple colors in it in the petals, and that's what florists and designers love because then it's a flower that they can use, like if they're doing a peach, this one works with peach, or it works with red if they were going to do red. Might be one that is works really well for both. And I've just really enjoyed hybridizing for the designers because that wasn't really an area that was being worked on at all. There were a lot of flowers that worked great for both. You think of Jomanda or Rose Toscano or Cafe au lait. Cafe au lait is not the best show flower, but it's been around for quite a while, so
Right.
it is, you will see it in shows. But so I was kind of intrigued and challenged by trying to figure out like new colors that that were maybe sort of vintage looking,
Mm.
more muted, maybe had gray in there too. And I'm really hoping to hybridize a brown dahlia someday. I've been working on it for years now, kind of like Coco Loco. Is that the rose that is sort
Yeah.
of the brownish pink color? I
Yeah.
would love to do that for dahlias. It just sounds beautiful. And I think the designers and florists would just love it.
Well,
But
when
I
you
don't know if
get
I can
it, I
grow.
want to. If you ever do that, I want to be the first in line to buy a tuber when you
Okay.
sell it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. So
amazing.
so that's fun. So this year I'm hybridizing for brown. I'm hybridizing for palms. Do you know palms, the little ones that are about 1 inch or so? And those
Yeah.
look really great in designs too. I think floral designs, a little pop of color, and they're really small in size. And so I'm getting some new colors in those too, because there are a lot of burgundy, there are a lot of yellow, but I think we could get some really, if you could get a like a mocha color in there, but this could take years and years and years, but it's still fun to do that. And then I also enjoy hybridizing the giants too, because I think because we have a long season here in California and it's dry, we can get seed from the giants. I think in other areas they have a hard time getting seed because there's so much water and
Mm.
wet, and the seeds tend to start to rot or mold. So yeah, so I'm doing that. I'm working on some new apricot colors. Those are in the second year. I got a lot of apricot last year. Um, and then of course I'm working on any more mocha colors like cafe au lait, but not cafe au lait, maybe smaller, better, holds up a little better. Um, and so that in a couple different forms, from formal decorative, informal palms. I'd love to have a series like that,
Oh
but
wow.
we'll
Yeah.
see.
That's a worthy
Yeah,
goal. I think that's
yeah.
that's something that I know would be ridiculously popular, and that's pretty cool. Well, okay, a couple questions I'm thinking. So what percentage of your dahlia space do you sort of set aside just for trialing or new hybrids that you've crossed?
Yeah, I think well, typically 2000, around 2000 plants a year. 1,000 I start in just first year seedlings. So those, dahlias can be grown from seed cuttings or tubers. So seeds that come from the flower, once it's spent, you can take those seeds out, and each seed makes a unique dahlia
Hmm.
out that's never been out there before. That's how all dahlias came originally, from a seed, which we don't really think about that, because we all think like dahlias, we plant tubers, but they all came from seed. And so I hybridized about 1,000 first year seedlings. I would say I have about 500 or more second, third, and fourth year seedlings. So those are the ones that I've decided I'm going to keep growing, make sure they make good tubers, that they grow well, that they keep looking like they're supposed to look. And then maybe 500 in other varieties that I'm bringing in to help with the hybridizing program. So I'm really, in the last like 4 years, I've switched a lot over to hybridizing, where before I used to, call my florists up and say, okay, what are you guys doing this year? Is it a white year? Is it a peach year? What's popular out there? Is
Right.
it and then I used to plant my garden accordingly. Fortunately, they said that this year a lot is going into peach. Peach is more of a color that's, at least around here, that seems to be popular for weddings, kind of a peachy blushy kind of look, as opposed to pure white. There's always white weddings here too, but I don't grow that many whites anymore. There are other dahlias growers around here that do grow a lot more whites than I do now, because I don't have that much room. Like you were saying, I
Yeah.
don't have that much room. If I had 20 acres, I could probably do it all, or even 5 acres, I could probably do it all, but I don't have that, so I have to prioritize what I'm going to grow.
Sure. Well, that's why I was wondering, because if you're digging tubers and saving them, and obviously you're labeling and your first year, second year, third year plants, but then I was just curious because I'm sure you have favorites from your florists, and it's always hard to let some of those go, to make space for new plants. But that's how you have to do that when you have limited space. It's
Yeah,
hard.
and what's nice about having suppliers that can propagate the varieties is I don't have to keep that many, because they can propagate them and get them out there for people to use.
True. Are you part of with Triple Red? I know they have like that legacy program that they
Mhm.
have. And so I guess you're
Yep.
part of that.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's really
Yeah.
great.
They mostly do hybridizers in their area, because Pacific Northwest is huge. A
Oh
lot of
yeah.
the hybridizers, like, they do a lot with Bloomquist, because he's kind of their neighbor right there. So, but we did go up to their farm last summer, and I gave a talk on dahlias. It was really fun to go to their festival. They have a little dahlia festival up there. Not little, they have pretty many dahlias.
I was gonna say,
A lot
I
of
think it's
dahlias up
kind of
there.
big.
Yeah, they are kind of big. Yeah.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, so that's it.
So I know only because Erin sent me seed a few years ago, and when her dahlia book came out,
Mhm.
and that was the first time I'd ever grown dahlias from seed. And I we moved, and I hated that I ended up having to leave them. And anyway, whatever. But a lot of the varieties that came up, and I don't know the classifications, but I'll say they were singles, or more
Mhm.
kind of like an anemone type, flower. And there's a couple that weren't, but from the time you cross to the time to bloom, it's what, about a year maybe?
Well, so what you typically do with dahlias is the dahlia plant grows, and then it produces flowers. And then once the flowers get a little bit on the older side, they pop their centers, and you can see the pollen. That pollen
Sure.
center is where the seeds are formed. And so what you would do is you would collect those seed. Once the seed head closes, you leave it on the plant for 6 weeks, and then the seeds mature over that time. And then you can open that seed head up and collect the seed. And then you basically, that's your season. I mean, there's
Right.
no time to start them, typically no time to start them on that season, and so then you start them the next season. So then they'd be first year seedlings, if you did it, if you collected in 22 and you started in 23, those would be your first year seedlings. So yeah, so that, and the reason that many of the seeds that you buy out there are singles is the bees tend to visit singles a lot more often. So if you
Mm,
had a garden that had open centers of any kind, like singles or anemones, the center is really big, super easy access for the bees. I mean, you can imagine them having to crawl into a big, fully doubled one that has all these petals and trying to find the center in there.
right.
Or when the center pops, it's really little because the center, all those petals have formed where the seed producing center used to be. So it's gotten smaller and smaller. So when you have a big center like that, 99% of the pollen could be collected from singles. So if you really want fully doubled dahlias in your patch, or if you want to grow them, you need to eliminate anything that has a big open center like that before you even collect any seed. Because that's what happened to me. That's why one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I said, oh, I've got 99% fully doubled in my patch. I only have a few of these singles over here. I like them because we show them too. And so the next year I got 99% singles, and I didn't want that. I was hoping for fully doubled
Right.
varieties. And so I just thought it was bad luck. So I'm like, okay, that's bad luck. I'll try it again. So the same thing happened again the next year. And then I'm like, okay, I have to figure out a new strategy for this. And so that's when I figured out that if you cull the plants that you don't want pollen taken from, like your singles, or even if you have highlighter yellow and you don't want any highlighter yellow, take that out. Even colors that you don't want, you could get your breeding colors and forms down to just what you want by eliminating at the end of the year, then cutting all your flowers off, letting them rebloom and let the bees do the work. So that's open pollination with culling. But there are about 9 different strategies for hybridizing. I use hand pollination mostly. So I take those organza bags that people use kind of to protect their flowers. I put those over buds, 2 buds, and then once those buds open and show pollen, I'll cross the 2 together. And that's how I'm thinking, like, how can I get that mocha color? How can I get that brown color? Could I cross these 2 together? And because with the bees doing it, it's very willy-nilly what pollen
Right.
is going to be brought to your flower. But when you do hand pollination, which is one of the strategies, it's just time consuming. I can spend 2 or 3 hours a day doing that. And I'm not as efficient or as knowledgeable as the bees, so they do a much better job. I might get like five seed, and if they had done it I would get 15 seed, but the 5 seed are what I'm hoping for, not 15 seed of something I don't necessarily want. And I can get my breeding goals closer if I do hand pollination. It's definitely the way to go if you really want to know what genetics are in your flower.
Yeah. Now that makes perfect sense because if you're relying on bees, I mean, they could visit 15 flowers and you never know which one is going to be, the connecting point. So it's wow.
Yeah.
I
And
love that.
dahlias are kind of like us too, that like some of us are barren, or like the male and female, it just is not doesn't work. It just doesn't work all the time. So that as a hybridizer, you kind of learn like, oh, this one's a good pollen parent, or this one's a good seed parent. So yeah. So
Interesting.
you kind of learn that over time.
Mm, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Well, it's so funny. I don't. I have my new friend that moved to our area last year. Her name is Erica Penn, and she is doing a little hybridizing on her own, I think. And before her, I was like very anti yellow dahlias because of the highlighter yellow, as you put it. And I I just I don't know. She brought me some yellows this year. I'm like, okay, you have converted me to the world of yellow dahlias. But and it's interesting you say what you said earlier about from the society standpoint that a lot of these yellows that are so amazing, they're not a pure color. It's this wonderful combination of tones and much more warm, much more seasonal, much more connecting with other colors. And I don't know. I I feel like dahlias at some point will probably pretty much come in almost every color, and there's a few that are on the outside, but who knows? Maybe you'll find a way to connect to them.
Yeah, I
But
don't think we can do black because they don't have the genes for that, but or blue.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
doesn't have those two genes, but you can get a pretty dark dahlia
yeah.
with like a dark burgundy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. It's just it's amazing the color palette and range of this one flower. Um, how many years do you evaluate a variety before you're like, okay, I can put my name on this and send it out, send my child out into the world?
Yeah, so you cross and get the seed. Then the next year you grow it out. I usually grow out two dahlia tubers and then evaluate that, and then another round of culling or eliminating at that point. Like, oh, I wonder why I kept that one, or it didn't. I don't think it grew like that last year. Maybe it's morphs because they do change sometimes. Dahlias have jumping genes, so the genes kind of can change. So that's another thing you're looking for is like stable genetics when you're looking for it. And then the next year you grow it out. You might grow five tubers out to kind of check it out, make sure it's doing really well, and then maybe introduce it the next year. So 3 or 4 years. Sometimes I wait 5 years. It kind of just depends, but it is a process for sure. And then
Yeah,
you have to grow enough to give it to your suppliers so that they can then, start selling them, and that could take them 3 or 4 years to really build up their supply. Because if you started with 20 and you get 4, you only have 80 tubers, but then you have to keep enough to grow to keep growing your supply. So if you sold them that year, you'd still only have, say, 40 tubers to start again, and then you're at 160 the next year. It's not like it goes from 2 to thousands in one season. It's a process of building your supply too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm surprised that there's not, and maybe it's just too expensive, but that there's not more cloning with some of these things to kind of get numbers ramped up quicker.
You mean like meristem, like
Yeah.
people do? Yeah. So well, Stonehouse is working on a meristem program right now, so we'll see in a few years. That also takes many years, couple years to get that kind of up to speed. So I'm hoping that Stonehouse will be successful with that, because they haven't really done a lot of meristem dahlias out there in the world. I think because it's not been until recently kind of a flower that even
Mm.
florists. I mean, when do you think florists were starting to use dahlias in a big way?
Well, I can remember, well, gosh, um, maybe 12 years ago, I started noticing it, but I also know it was interesting. I didn't realize this till recently. Like a lot of times people felt like dahlias were just sort of a yard flower. Like they didn't really think of that. It's not elevated like it is now, as far as the demand goes, or the merit of it, I guess. Kind of like a zinnia or a sunflower, and I never understood that, um, but yeah, I would probably say, gosh, what was it? Well, I remember a Facebook post that was on Florette's page that I had a customer come to me and show me there was like four dahlias on this post. One of them was cafe au lait. I had never even heard of cafe au lait at that point. And there were three other varieties that were similar in tone, but were a little bit different, a little lighter, maybe a little creamier, things like that. And and I thought to myself, wow, that is going to be a really popular wedding color. And that's all I remember. From that point forward, dahlias were the rage, and everybody. I just think that there's a lot of. It's just like I don't know how to put this. It's almost like it just takes the color. It's like if you get that color on a certain flower, it doesn't matter what the flower is. It's going to be people are going to start screaming for it. Zinnias. Like I think about zinnias, and And how often like they're kind of treated second class, even though I love them. But then all of a sudden, when the Queen Lime series, the Queen Lime Red series came out, and a lot of these muddy tones started coming out and things like that, all of a sudden people started, what is that? What is that color? And oh my gosh, that would work great with this. And next thing you know, people want buckets of it. And then now they look at the entire group of zinnias differently, and I kind of think that might have been what happened with dahlias.
Hmm.
And then I also think availability. The biggest problem with dahlias was shipping. You couldn't really ship them well. And so nobody in California was really growing them back then because of that. And over time, they've kind of figured out some of the shipping challenges. Now we get them in hampers from California. We can get them year round if we want to pay for them. And, there are some growers in your neck of the woods that grow lots and lots of dahlias for the wholesale and florist community, which I think are great. But I still think the shelf life and the fragility of dahlias, it's best local. It's just a local flower market, situation.
Hmm.
And I think that when more growers started growing them and people started seeing this is a flower that lasts when you cut it at the right stage and it's fresh and it's you also it just there was an awakening of this flower, and it was the right place at the right time. I think I don't
Yeah.
know I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like that to me too, that it just started to getting used a lot more in the 18 years I've been growing. I mean, they were popular, but not like they are now. Yeah, it's really changed. I maybe more people started using them and people started seeing them because of social media, and then they're
Sure.
like, "Oh, I want that." And so I think that made a big difference for the dahlia in general, that
Yeah.
it just is out there and people are seeing it. I think some people say to me like, "Oh, I always thought that was like a old lady's flower or something," and I'm like, "Oh, really? Huh?" Because I don't see it that way, but it's not that way anymore for sure.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And I feel like the more and more I see things, I think it's only going to get bigger. And I'm excited to see ways of different growers in different parts of the country and how they adjust for their climate, um, to extend the season or to start them earlier or things like that. It's fascinating to me, really. Um, you know, you're sort of in the Pacific Northwest more so, but you're not far. You're not far from there, in sort of like this term I've heard before, like the Goldilocks zone for dahlias. A lot of places in the country don't have the same benefit of the weather and the climate or the
Mhm.
humidity and things like that. As far as different pest pressures or things. I know I hear a lot about thrips. I hear a lot about, powdery mildew, which you mentioned earlier. Any ideas or tips that are really good for like trying to help growers deal with some of those challenges?
Well, because we started out as showing dahlias, we really learned a lot about how to keep them almost perfect, because that's what a show flower is. It can't be chewed on the edges, and the leaves have to look
Yeah.
pretty good. And so I was thankful that I had a Dahlia Society that could teach me that. So there are lots of different options. Like I like to grow organically, so I use OMRI approved products. But you can use all different kinds of products to keep your pest pressure down and your powdery mildew down. I use Monterey Bay horticultural oil. So it's an oil that basically you spray onto the leaves, and when the powdery mildew, which is mostly airborne, comes down and wants to find purchase on the leaf and then make the white powder that you see, it can't, because there's oil there instead, and it can't find purchase. So what I do is I start a program of spraying with the oil like within the plant being like a foot tall, and I just keep it up every 10 days. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It takes about 4 hours to do 2,000 dahlias. So, but I can, otherwise my season would be really short here in Santa Cruz. I know some areas don't get powdery mildew, but we're kind of in the perfect zone. We're like 70 degrees and that's what it
Right.
loves. And, we're kind of moist, right by the ocean. So, that those are things that I watch for. We do have thrips and aphids, and cucumber beetles and
Oh yeah.
licus and different bugs. And so I typically spray two every about 10 days with a spinosad based product called Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew.
Oh, I've seen
And if,
that. Yeah.
yeah, if I do those two things here, I'm pretty much covered, and my blooms are really nice and my plants stay really healthy. So for me, those are the two big ones here. We don't have Japanese beetles. I hope I don't even want to say yet, but I hear they're coming and I don't know what to do. I think every year as a grower, we all know this, like, bring it on, something new is coming. So we'll have to just deal with it, learn how to turn on a dime, or figure out how to figure out the issue that's coming our way. But yeah, we do have a good environment here. We do have easy weather. We don't get too hot. We don't get too cold. We can have a long season, but it's pretty amazing. Like, people in South Carolina are growing dahlias just beautifully. I was talking to someone who grows there and she goes, "Oh, so you get almost a dahlia a day?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "Oh, we probably get half that because of the heat. The
Mhm.
dahlias don't produce quite as much for her." So I thought that was interesting. I'd never really even thought of that myself, thinking that that environment might play a big part in how many blooms you actually get too.
Yeah, some friends of mine that well, I'm not sure if you've heard of or follow Three Porch Farms
Hmm.
down outside of Athens, Georgia. I know she Mandy's friends with Aaron Benzakine, and it was funny because I guess she had gone to one of their courses early on when they were in person, and there they talk about cafe au laits. Like, there, you up there you can cut 100, I don't know a number, I'm just trying to make a point, but like 100 stems and 6 square feet, and in Georgia you're lucky to cut 10 stems in 6 square feet at a
Yeah.
time. And it's just, I think, I don't know, I'm not the expert, but I feel like the nighttime temperatures plays a huge part of that, and just the plant getting to rest and not be stressed, and then just being prolific. But I know there's a lot of things. I want to ask a question about, you mentioned the oil and the other
Captain Jack's.
Captain Jack's. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times when you are applying those kinds of products, you have to really be careful of the blooms. I've not used either of those products, but I'm curious, how do you work around that? Because I know they can spot flowers, or is it about the
Mhm.
stage, or maybe
Yeah.
after you cut, you apply it. I'm curious about
Yeah,
that.
that's a good question. Yeah, we usually spray the day of hard cutting our plants hard. So because thrips tend to enjoy pollen and the
Hmm.
flowers, we like to spray into the bud, but when it's in bud form, not when the petals are out, because you can get, if the sun came out. I mean, we typically spray in the evening, like sometimes even with headlamps, because sun and oil is not the best for anything, like
Right.
even your leaves. So you have to wait. If you give it overnight, the oils kind of seeps into the leaves, and then it's not a problem if the sun comes out. But if you did it in the middle of the day, you could get some burning with that, and you can get spotting on your flowers as well. So we try to spray into the bud when it's in little bud form, just opening, because the thrips will be hanging out in there. And then the fact that we're taking off our blooms every twice a week, we're also removing thrips from our garden too, that
Hmm.
way, in a
That's a
way,
good point.
because
Yeah.
we deadhead whenever we can, because thrips like to stay in older blooms because there's pollen there. And so you kind of always want to be thinking about the insects, and how can I better manage my flowers by cutting them. Cutting is really important. And we also disbud. You know how there are secondary buds on either side of the main bud.
Right.
On dahlias. We remove those. So we spend hours and hours every week removing those. And the reason we do that is then more of the energy can go to the main flower. So then you get a bigger flower, less energy taken away. And a lot of times those secondary buds come off anyway. And so that's a lot of energy for the plant. If you think of a bloom taking up a lot of energy for the plant, if you wanted to save your plant a fair amount of energy, you would want to remove those secondary buds. Just to give them a break, because they're
Yeah.
going to try to make 3 flowers instead of just one. So
Yeah.
they can put all their energy to that, and then you have less blooms for the bugs to alight on or eat on or whatever they do, all the things they do.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
when you were describing that, that made me think about feeding dahlias, because I know you mentioned they were kind of heavy feeders.
Hmm.
Um, does everything go through drip irrigation, or do you do foliar feeding? I'm curious, what you recommend for that.
Yeah, so over the years, I've been building my organic matter in my soil. So, and then, like I said, I do the cover crop in the winter. So that's
Hmm.
like a green manure. So that is fertilizer in itself. And then the fact that I'm feeding the biology in the soil, they are heavy feeders. And but the fact that my soil's so kind of pumped up from all the organic matter, I really don't fertilize very often at all, because the soil is just perfect. I mean, because we do have a long season, sometimes in the middle of the season, I will put a shovel full of compost if I see the plants seem like they're like, oh, they could get a little something right now. I would do that and maybe water that in and give them a kind of a boost mid-season. But I haven't been fertilizing for years now because the soil, I think the cover crop is huge in keeping your soil really nitrified and really healthy. So I feel really lucky because I used to fertilize like every 3 weeks. So I think if you haven't done a soils test and you're not sure and your plants aren't looking that healthy, then you would probably want to fertilize every 3 weeks or so. And if you're growing in pots, every week, those tend to not have the ability to reach out and get more nutrients. They're just concentrated in the pot. Although potting soils are generally really well balanced for dahlias, I've found.
Mm, that's good to know. Well, and I
Mm.
think too in pots you have a lot, you can with rain or whatever, you can get a lot of leaching and things like that, and you're having to replace that. I'm really glad you shared that, because I know sometimes it goes back to the soil and just the importance of that soil being sort of your source for all things wonderful.
Mhm.
And I just wondered, because of your long growing season, if your plants ever did get tired, like let's say September, October, they've been feeding for so long because your season's so long that, you kind of give them a boost. But you just mentioned the compost. So,
Yeah, I just do the compost usually. I mean, sometimes I'll do blood meal because I am high in phosphorus and potassium, and blood meal is 100% nitrogen. You can do blood meal or feather meal. I think alfalfa too doesn't have any phosphorus and potassium. So for me, because I did a soils test, I know I need to avoid that. I don't want to add any extra of either of those to my garden because I'm already really in the high level. So
sure.
yeah, so you do want to. I think the soils test is a really good way to start to kind of figure out your soil.
Hmm. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question, and I'm sorry I didn't think of it sooner. Um, you know, a lot of new people out there growing dahlias. Everyone wants to grow dahlias, I think, now more than ever. If I'm a flower farmer and I'm selling my blooms, what are some of maybe your top picks for, like, maybe, I don't know if you've got a handful of top pick varieties that you would
Sure.
recommend for people to start out with, maybe because they're resilient, good producers, they're easy. Just kind of curious, since you're looking for those qualities as you breed,
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think.
Well, the balls and miniature balls and the palms, because the petals are so tightly compacted into the flower head, those are good ones because to start out with because they tend to be a little more forgiving. Sometimes the
Mm,
big, more blossomy ones that have longer petals like cafe au lait. They don't last as long on your plant. I would grow valley porcupine if I was starting out. We kind of joke around and call it the plastic flower, plastic dahlia, because it's got an unusual form. It's a beautiful kind of pearly pink color, and it lasts forever. Like if someone said, which one would you grow if you could only grow one and you needed it to last like 2 weeks or something, I would say, oh, valley porcupine. I would just grow that one. That's the best one that I can think of to grow. Yeah, it's beautiful and amazing and small, so it's good size for floral arrangements and bridal bouquets.
Oh, I love that.
So well, I mean, I like a lot of my varieties, but
You're allowed.
they're all fun. Hayes Rosie Joe's a really great one to have, and it does really well, and it produces a ton of tubers. So if you bought one, you would have a lot for the next year. So those are good. But really all the formal decks, balls, mini balls, and palms probably are the best for longevity, easy to grow, don't take up as maybe much space in your garden. They have smaller plant size generally. The giants tend to, produce maybe a giant bloom every once a week or once every 5 days. So you wouldn't have the amount of blooms. And it's kind of fun when you're first starting out to just have lots of flowers to give to friends and say, I grew this. Look how beautiful this is. So I would probably do that. I might, if I only had room to grow like 5, I might think about how those 5 go together and pick them based on color. Because, you would normally put them in a bouquet together. So I might think about that. I could see that being kind of fun for someone who's really a lot about color.
Well, and I think earlier you mentioned the popularity, the feedback you got of the peaches and apricots and all those kind of tones. There are flowers that have those colors in them, but I think the range of that color that comes from the dahlia family is so magnificent. And I just can't think of a family of flowers that produces so much variety and shape and color and style, but yet in that family of color, I mean, I feel like dahlias, when it comes to that whole family, it hits it out of the park every time.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you saying that about the larger dahlias producing less frequently, because I think a lot of times that's what people gravitate towards. They hear cafe au lait, they hear these big, beautiful, bold varieties, which are magnificent. I mean, there's nothing, they can't say anything bad about them. But if you're after, production per square foot, that's probably not going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, believe it or not. So I think that's really awesome. Well, I one of these days, it's been a long time since I've been to your neck of the woods, as we say here in the South. I need to come. I need to make my way that way this year at some point, because I love to see what you're doing and just the varieties. If you don't follow Kristine on Instagram, you need to follow her. It's Santa Cruz Dahlias. It's definitely worth the time. I mean, I loved watching you do your cuttings this winter in your big tub of medium that you're doing all those tubers, and I think that's great, and another great way to propagate them, of course.
Yeah, we have about like 160 kind of educational videos on YouTube too, just under my name, Kristine Albrecht, and they're kind of in categories. So if you're like dividing your tubers and you want to see like me doing that a couple times different ways, you could see that, or the cutting bed, like you said, that there'll be quite a few different ones on the cutting bed if you wanted to watch and get that set up.
That's awesome. Oh, great. Good. I didn't even know that. That's great. Well, Kristine, I always like to end with the advice question. And, I just, when it comes to, it can be something that means a lot to you, that someone shared with you, or maybe something you want to leave with our listeners.
Yeah, maybe a couple things. I mean, one, I would really recommend doing a cover crop, because I really think that would makes a huge difference for the dahlias. So I would recommend that. and getting a soils test. I guess those would be my two areas of recommendation. And then I don't know, we kind of have we talk about spreading the dahlia love. And so we like spreading that in Santa Cruz. And I know it sounds very Santa Cruz-y, but we try to, introduce people to dahlias because I think it's just an amazing flower, and I think people really enjoy it once they get to know it. So I would spread the dahlia love. We're working on making some bouquets to just place around our town and say, take me home. And so people can kind of learn more about dahlias that way too.
I love that.
Our Dahlia Society is going to be doing that.
What a great way to market. And I'm going to throw in, if you have a Dahlia Society in your corner of the planet, find them, be friends with them. You'll learn so much about growing dahlias in your area that may be specific to what you do. I think that's a tremendous resource, and I have a feeling you'll make new best friends there if you're a flower farmer. So
yeah, they're really so knowledgeable on what varieties grow well in your climate. So that can be super helpful. They know, they've been there, done that a zillion times, and so they can give you the best advice for your climate. Like, oh, you need to put up shade cloth. It's too hot here. 30% shade cloth. Like, how would you know that unless you talk to someone? So it's really a great society to join, and it's fun. I mean, I have two of my best friends from joining the Dahlia Society.
I love that. That's so great. Well, Kristine, thank you so much for being on the Flower Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Scott. This was so fun. I love talking about dahlias, so you just gave me a gift. Thank you.
Thank you.